My name is Melanie, and I am 32 years old. After 5 dedicated years at a tech company where I had climbed from entry level to project manager, I was suddenly fired without legitimate cause. When I applied for unemployment benefits, our HR director Beverly looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Do not bother applying, we will contest it." She thought I would just accept defeat and walk away. She was wrong. If you enjoy stories about workplace justice, I promise this one will be worth your time. Before I dive in, let me know where you are watching from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button to support more stories like this one. Datatech Systems was not just any software company. It was considered the crown jewel of the local tech industry, with clients ranging from Fortune 500 corporations to government agencies. I joined the company fresh out of college with my computer science degree, eager and perhaps a little naive about the corporate world. My starting position was as a junior software developer working on their flagship data analytics platform. From day one, I put my heart and soul into every project. I stayed late, came in early, and spent weekends learning new programming languages that could benefit our team. My dedication did not go unnoticed. Within 2 years, I was promoted to senior developer, and by my 4th year, I was leading my own team as a project manager. My annual performance reviews consistently rated me as exceptional, with comments like invaluable asset and exemplary leadership skills. The workplace culture at Datatech was initially what drew me in. My colleagues were brilliant, innovative people who challenged me to grow. I formed particularly close friendships with Ada, our database specialist, and Jessica, our user experience designer. The 3 of us became inseparable, often collaborating across departments to solve complex problems that others deemed impossible. One of my proudest achievements was leading the development of a custom security protocol that helped the company secure a $20 million contract with a major banking institution. The client specifically mentioned my team in their feedback, saying our solution was more elegant and effective than what competitors had proposed. The CEO even sent out a company-wide email praising our work with my name prominently featured. My direct supervisor Thomas was supportive and became something of a mentor to me. He trusted my judgment and gave me increasing autonomy over projects. Thomas often told me he saw me as his successor when he eventually moved up to the executive level. We had weekly one-on-one meetings where he provided guidance on navigating corporate politics and developing leadership skills. My personal life was finally stabilizing after years of hard work. With my salary increases and annual bonuses, I had managed to build a decent emergency fund and was making extra payments on my student loans. I had even started looking at condos, dreaming of finally owning my own place instead of renting. Everything seemed to be falling into place perfectly. But there was one persistent dark cloud in the otherwise sunny environment of Datatech. Beverly Martin, the human resources director. Beverly had been with the company since its founding 15 years ago and wielded considerable influence with the executive team. She was known for playing favorites and implementing policies that often seemed arbitrary. Several talented employees had mysteriously departed after disagreements with her, but her position seemed untouchable. I had managed to stay under her radar for most of my time at Datatech, but that changed when I advocated for a more transparent promotion process. As project manager, I noticed that qualified team members were being overlooked while less experienced employees with connections to Beverly were advancing rapidly. I brought my concerns to Thomas, who encouraged me to draft a proposal for a more objective evaluation system. Around 6 months before my termination, I began noticing subtle changes. Emails about important meetings would arrive in my inbox after the meetings had already occurred. My team was suddenly reassigned to lower priority projects without explanation. Resources I requested were delayed or denied entirely. I expressed my concerns to Thomas, who assured me it was just temporary due to budget adjustments, but the knot in my stomach told me something else was happening. The company had started a restructuring initiative, supposedly to streamline operations and prepare for expansion. There were whispers of layoffs, but most people assumed they would target the newer, less established employees. Given my track record and the value I had brought to the company, I believed my position was secure. When Thomas hinted that I should prepare a presentation about my team's achievements for the executive committee, I thought perhaps a promotion was on the horizon. I spent 2 weeks preparing that presentation, gathering metrics, testimonials from clients, and projections for future growth. I practiced in front of Ada and Jessica, who offered constructive feedback and encouragement. The day before my scheduled presentation, I received a calendar notification that it had been canceled without explanation. When I asked Thomas about it, He seemed uncomfortable and said there had been a change in priorities. That weekend, I received an email notifying me that my access to certain databases had been restricted for security purposes. It struck me as odd since I needed those databases for my current project, but I assumed it was a technical error that would be fixed by Monday. I had no idea that Monday would be my last day at Datatech Systems. That Monday morning started like any other. I stopped at my favorite coffee shop for my usual large latte, chatted with the barista about weekend plans, and arrived at the office by 8:30 a.m. As I settled at my desk and opened my laptop, an instant message popped up from Beverly. Please come to conference room 3 immediately for an important meeting. My first thought was that perhaps they had rescheduled my presentation. I grabbed my notebook and headed to the conference room, mentally reviewing the key points I wanted to highlight about my team's accomplishments. When I entered, I found Beverly sitting there with Gregory Thompson, the senior HR director, who usually only flew in from headquarters for major issues. There was no sign of Thomas or any other department heads. The atmosphere in the room felt heavy and tense. Please have a seat, Melanie Beverly, said her voice oddly formal. She slid a folder across the table toward me. We have called you here to inform you that your employment with Datatech Systems is being terminated effective immediately. The words hit me like a physical blow. I remember staring at Beverly, waiting for more explanation, waiting for this to make sense. But why, I finally managed to ask. I just received an excellent performance review last quarter. My team is exceeding all our targets. Gregory cleared his throat. The termination is due to performance issues that do not meet company standards, he said, reading from what appeared to be a script. Your position requires a level of productivity and collaboration that unfortunately you have not been able to maintain. I felt like I had stepped into an alternate reality. The claims they were making had no basis in fact. This is completely untrue, I said, my voice rising slightly. I have documentation of all my performance reviews. I can show you the client testimonials. I can prove that what you are saying is false. Beverly's expression remained cold. The decision has been made at the highest levels, Melanie. There is no appeal process. I asked to speak with Thomas, but was told he was unavailable. I requested specific examples of these alleged performance issues, but was given only vague references to communication problems and failure to meet expectations without any concrete instances. When I pointed out that none of these concerns had ever been documented in my file or mentioned in any previous discussions, Gregory simply repeated that the decision was final. You need to surrender your keycard and company devices now, Beverly said. Security will escort you to your desk to collect any personal items, and then you will be escorted from the building. I sat there stunned into silence, as Beverly called security. Within minutes, 2 uniformed guards appeared at the door. One of them, Steve, had always greeted me warmly every morning for 5 years. Now he could barely meet my eyes as he waited to escort me out like a criminal. As we walked through the open office, I could feel the stares of my colleagues. Some looked away quickly, others watched with expressions of shock or pity. I spotted Ada, who half rose from her chair, as if to come to me, but Jessica put a hand on her arm, shaking her head slightly. The message was clear: do not get involved, or you might be next. At my desk, I was given 5 minutes to gather personal belongings: family photos, my favorite coffee mug, a few books. The security guards watched as I emptied my drawers, making sure I did not take anything that belonged to the company. I was not allowed to access my computer to save personal files, or even to say goodbye to my team members via email. Is this really necessary? I asked Steve quietly, as I packed my small box. You know me. I have been here 5 years. I am not going to steal trade secrets or damage anything. He looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Rules were rules. As I was being escorted toward the exit, I saw Thomas coming out of the elevator. Our eyes met, and for a moment I thought he would come over, would demand an explanation, would stand up for me. Instead, he quickly looked away and hurried in the opposite direction. That moment of abandonment from someone I had trusted hurt almost as much as the termination itself. The final indignity came when we reached the lobby. Beverly was waiting there with a termination letter for me to sign, acknowledging receipt. When I asked for time to review it with a lawyer, she informed me that refusing to sign would result in further complications regarding my final paycheck. Under pressure and still in shock, I signed the paper without fully reading it, a decision I would later regret. The guards escorted me all the way to my car. As I put my small box of belongings in the trunk, I noticed my hands were shaking. The reality of what had just happened was beginning to sink in. 5 years of dedication erased in less than 30 minutes. The drive home passed in a blur. I remember sitting in my parked car in front of my apartment building for nearly an hour, unable to move, trying to process what had happened. When I finally went inside, I collapsed on my couch and let the tears come. What had I done wrong? How could this happen without any warning? What would I do now? That evening I tried calling Thomas multiple times, desperate for answers or support. My calls went straight to voicemail. I sent him a text asking simply for an explanation, but received no response. The same Thomas who had mentored me for years, who had promised to help advance my career, had vanished when I needed him most. I spent that night alternating between tears and anger, reviewing every recent interaction, searching for clues I might have missed. By morning, exhaustion had replaced shock, but I was no closer to understanding why I had been fired from a job where I had consistently excelled. After the initial shock wore off, I realized I needed to take action. With my emergency fund, I could survive for a few months, but I would need to find another job quickly or apply for unemployment benefits to bridge the gap. Given the sudden nature of my termination and lack of documented performance issues, I believed I would qualify for unemployment insurance. I spent the next day researching my rights as an employee in our state. I learned that employers cannot legally terminate workers without cause if it is done to prevent them from collecting unemployment benefits. I also discovered that if a company fires someone for misconduct, they must provide specific evidence of that misconduct. Armed with this knowledge, I called the company's HR department to request my personnel file and documentation regarding my termination. The receptionist seemed sympathetic but said Beverly would need to approve this request. 2 days later, I received an email stating I could pick up copies of certain documents, but would need to sign additional confidentiality agreements first. When I arrived at the office for my appointment, I was met by a security guard who escorted me to a small conference room where Beverly was waiting. Her expression was a mixture of annoyance and superiority, as if I were wasting her valuable time. "Here are the documents you requested," she said, sliding a thin folder across the table. "Though I am not sure what you hope to accomplish." I opened the folder to find my original employment contract, my most recent performance review from 6 months prior, and a termination letter that was much more detailed than the one I had signed on my way out. This new letter listed several instances of insubordination, failure to meet deadlines, and creating a negative work environment with specific dates and examples that had never been mentioned to me before. "This is completely fabricated," I said, looking up at Beverly in disbelief. "None of these incidents ever happened. There is nothing in my file about any of these issues." Beverly shrugged. "That is your interpretation. The company has documented these concerns internally." "I am going to apply for unemployment benefits," I told her. "I was terminated without cause." That was when Beverly leaned forward, her expression hardening. "Do not bother applying. We will contest it. Datatech has never paid an unemployment claim, and we are not starting now. The documentation clearly shows you are fired for cause." Her dismissive attitude made something shift inside me. This was not just about a job anymore. This was about justice and standing up to corporate bullying. "We will see about that," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. I left the building and immediately drove to the state unemployment office to file my claim. The clerk who helped me seemed concerned when I explained the situation, especially when I mentioned that the company had threatened to contest any claim before I even filed. "That is unusual," she admitted. "Usually companies wait to review claims before deciding whether to contest them. It almost sounds like they have a policy of automatically fighting all unemployment claims." "Is that legal?" I asked. "Not if they are doing it systematically," she replied. "Employers have the right to contest individual claims they believe are invalid, but they cannot have a blanket policy of denying all claims regardless of circumstances." 2 weeks later, I received notice that Datatech had indeed contested my unemployment claim, citing gross misconduct as the reason for my termination. According to their filing, I had deliberately sabotaged a client project, shared confidential information, and violated numerous company policies. None of these accusations had any basis in reality. I was not only denied benefits, but now had these serious allegations on record. The injustice of it all left me feeling both furious and helpless. I needed allies, people who could corroborate my performance and character. I reached out to several former colleagues, hoping someone would be willing to speak up for me. Most responded with brief sympathetic messages but declined to get involved, citing fear for their own positions. However, Ada agreed to meet me for coffee at a cafe far from the office. When we met, Ada looked nervous, constantly checking over her shoulder. "I cannot stay long," she whispered. "They have been watching all of us since you left. Thomas told the team your termination was confidential and we should not discuss it." Thomas said that I asked, hurt by this further betrayal. Ada nodded grimly. "He has been different since you left. But Melanie, there is something you should know. Your firing had nothing to do with performance." She explained that Beverly had been planning to bring in her niece Amanda, who had recently graduated with a computer science degree. The position Amanda wanted, project manager of the security division, my position. But with the company's hiring freeze, the only way to create an opening was to eliminate an existing employee. "Beverly has done this before," Ada continued. "Remember Stephanie from accounting, Richard from marketing? Both fired with similar accusations, both positions filled by Beverly's connections." I sat back, stunned by this revelation. "That is illegal." "It gets worse," Ada said. "I have heard they have a standard procedure for fighting unemployment claims. They create backdated performance issues and make the termination seem justified. At least 6 people have been denied benefits this way in the past year alone." She had to leave quickly after sharing this information, fearful of being seen with me. But before she left, she squeezed my hand and said, "Fight this, Melanie. Someone needs to stand up to them." That evening, I received an unexpected call from Jessica. She was crying and immediately apologized for not reaching out sooner. "They made us sign new confidentiality agreements the day after you left," she explained. "They threatened to fire anyone who contacted you. But I cannot stay silent anymore. What they did to you was wrong." Jessica confirmed everything Ada had told me and added that the company appeared to be systematically targeting employees who were approaching their 5-year mark when additional benefits would kick in. "I found an old spreadsheet on the shared drive," she whispered. It had a list of employees with their start dates highlighted. Almost everyone who was approaching 5 years has been let go in the past 18 months. And none of them received unemployment. This was no longer just about my termination. This was a pattern of calculated, unethical behavior that had harmed multiple employees. The company was not just saving on my salary, they were avoiding unemployment insurance payments by falsifying reasons for termination. With a renewed sense of purpose, I contacted Rachel Santos, a labor attorney recommended by a friend. After hearing my story and reviewing the documents I had collected, Rachel's assessment was blunt. "What they are doing is not just unethical, it is illegal," she said. "The question is, do you want to fight just for your benefits? Or do you want to expose the whole system?" Looking at the fabricated claims against me, thinking of all the others who had been similarly mistreated, my path became clear. This was not just about money anymore. It was about holding Datatech accountable for their actions. "I want to expose everything," I said firmly. "Where do we start?" Rachel was methodical in her approach. First, she helped me file an appeal for my denied unemployment benefits, challenging the company's claims of misconduct. Then she suggested we build a broader case about Datatech's systematic abuse of the unemployment system. "Individual cases can be dismissed as misunderstandings," she explained, "but if we can demonstrate a pattern of behavior, the state labor department will take it much more seriously." She advised me to document everything I could remember about my time at Datatech, focusing on performance reviews, commendations, and any evidence contradicting the company's claims. She also suggested reaching out to other former employees who might have experienced similar treatment. This was easier said than done. Most former employees were bound by the same confidentiality agreements I had signed, and many were reluctant to risk potential legal action. However, through professional networking sites, I managed to connect with 4 other former Datatech employees who had been terminated in the past 18 months. Their stories were eerily similar to mine. Excellent performance reviews, followed by sudden termination with fabricated misconduct claims, and all had been denied unemployment benefits after the company contested their applications. One former employee, Michael, had even recorded a conversation where his manager admitted the termination was due to budget cuts, contradicting the official reason given to the unemployment office. Meanwhile, I dove into learning everything I could about our state's labor laws and unemployment insurance regulations. I discovered that employers have a legal obligation to provide accurate information when contesting unemployment claims. Deliberately misrepresenting the reasons for termination constituted fraud against the state unemployment insurance system. Rachel helped me compile a comprehensive dossier of evidence, including my performance reviews showing consistent excellence, emails from clients praising my work, the project documentation showing successful completion of assignments, allegedly sabotaged testimonials from former colleagues willing to speak on my behalf, a timeline showing the suspicious pattern of document creation after my termination. The most damning evidence came unexpectedly from Jessica. Despite the risk to her own job, she secretly forwarded me an email chain between Beverly and Gregory discussing my termination. In it, Beverly explicitly stated, "We need to create sufficient documentation to ensure her unemployment claim will be denied. Use the standard template and backdate it to create a 6-month history of performance issues." This email was the smoking gun we needed. Not only did it prove my termination was unjustified, but it also confirmed the existence of a systematic process to deny legitimate unemployment claims. With this evidence in hand, Rachel suggested we take our case directly to the State Labor Department rather than just appealing my individual claim. She helped me draft a formal complaint alleging systematic unemployment insurance fraud, wrongful termination, and creation of false business records. This will trigger a much broader investigation than a simple appeals process, she explained. The Labor Department takes fraud against the unemployment insurance system very seriously because it affects their funding and operations. Filing the complaint was both terrifying and empowering. I knew Datatech would likely retaliate in some way, perhaps by threatening legal action for violating confidentiality agreements or making defamatory statements. But the alternative, allowing them to continue exploiting employees without consequences, was unacceptable. The waiting period after filing the complaint was excruciating. Weeks passed with no word from the Labor Department. During this time, my financial situation grew increasingly precarious. My emergency fund was dwindling, and despite applying for dozens of positions, I had secured only a few interviews. The tech industry in our area was small, and I suspected Datatech might be quietly blacklisting me. Ada and Jessica became my lifelines during this difficult period. Despite the risks to their own jobs, they checked in regularly, providing emotional support and occasional inside information about developments at the company. Through them, I learned that Beverly had hired her niece Amanda as planned, and that Thomas had been promoted to a new position that reported directly to the executive team. "He sold you out for a promotion," Ada said bluntly, during one of our secret coffee meetings. "Everyone knows it, but no one says anything. People are scared." The stress took a toll on my physical and mental health. I developed insomnia and anxiety, constantly checking my email for updates from the Labor Department or responses to job applications. Some days it was hard to even get out of bed, overwhelmed by the injustice and uncertainty. I started attending a support group for people experiencing workplace trauma, which helped me realize I was not alone in my struggle. Many others had faced similar situations, and hearing their stories of resilience gave me strength. Through this group, I connected with a local workers' rights organization that offered additional resources and guidance. 3 months after my termination, I finally received a response from the State Labor Department. They had reviewed my complaint and found sufficient evidence to open a formal investigation into Datatech's unemployment insurance practices. 2 investigators, Marcus Johnson and Linda Ramirez, had been assigned to the case and wanted to interview me as soon as possible. The day I met with Marcus and Linda marked a turning point. They listened intently as I shared my experience, occasionally taking notes or asking clarifying questions. When I presented the email Jessica had forwarded, Linda's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "This is extremely valuable evidence," she said. "Most companies are careful not to create such explicit paper trails of fraudulent activity." Marcus explained that they would be conducting a comprehensive audit of Datatech's unemployment claims over the past 3 years, interviewing other former employees, and potentially examining the company's internal records. "Based on what we have seen so far, there appears to be a serious pattern of misrepresentation," he said. "If confirmed, the company could face substantial penalties, including fines and increased unemployment insurance rates." For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. The system designed to protect workers' rights was actually working. My voice was being heard, and Datatech would finally face scrutiny for their actions. As the investigation progressed more, former employees came forward with their stories, emboldened by the official nature of the inquiry. Even Thomas eventually agreed to speak with the investigators, apparently having had a change of heart about his role in the company's unethical practices. The scope of the investigation expanded beyond unemployment fraud to include allegations of discrimination, retaliation, against whistleblowers, and wage and hour violations. What had begun as my personal quest for justice was evolving into a comprehensive examination of Datatech's entire corporate culture. Throughout this process, Rachel provided invaluable guidance, helping me navigate the legal complexities and prepare for each step of the investigation. She reminded me to focus on documented facts rather than emotions, and to be patient with the sometimes slow pace of bureaucratic processes. Investigations like this can take time, she cautioned, but based on the evidence and the number of affected employees coming forward, I believe the Labor Department will take decisive action. 6 months after my termination, I received the call I had been waiting for. The investigation was complete, and the Labor Department was ready to act. Marcus informed me that they would be conducting an unannounced visit to Datatech the following week to present their findings and initiate enforcement proceedings. "Would you like to know when we will be there?" he asked. "We cannot invite you along, of course, but there is no regulation preventing you from knowing the timing." I appreciated the gesture, but declined. "Just let me know what happens," I said. This was never about watching them squirm. It was about accountability and preventing others from experiencing what I did. Nevertheless, I could not help but imagine Beverly's face when she realized the full extent of the investigation she had triggered with her casual dismissal of my rights. That image sustained me through the final days of waiting. The morning of the Labor Department's visit to Datatech dawned bright and clear. Although I had told Marcus I did not need to know when they would be there, he had called the previous evening to give me a heads up, saying he felt I deserved to know when this significant moment would occur. "We will be arriving at 10 a.m., he said. Linda and I, along with 2 additional investigators and a representative from the State Attorney General's office. The presence of someone from the AG's office usually sends a clear message about the seriousness of our findings. I spent that morning in a state of nervous anticipation, unable to focus on anything for more than a few minutes. Around 11:30 a.m., my phone rang displaying Jessica's number. "You would not believe what just happened," she said in a hushed, excited voice. I could tell she had stepped outside or into a stairwell to make the call. 5 people from the government just walked into the office and asked to speak with Beverly and Gregory. They looked extremely official with badges and everything. How did Beverly react? I could not help asking. She greeted them with her usual fake smile, probably assuming they were potential clients. Then they handed her some kind of folder or file. She opened it, looked at the first page, and I swear her hand started shaking. I have never seen her lose composure like that. She went completely pale. Jessica continued describing how Beverly had quickly ushered the investigators into the main conference room, summoning Gregory and the company's legal counsel. The office had immediately erupted with speculation and whispered conversations. "Someone from accounting said they mentioned your name," Jessica added. "And now everyone is connecting the dots about your termination and what is happening today." Later that afternoon, Ada called with more details. The investigators had remained at Datatech for over 4 hours, requesting access to personnel files, unemployment claim records, and email correspondence. They had conducted interviews with several current employees, including Thomas, who had apparently been cooperative. "The rumor is that Thomas finally stood up to Beverly," Ada reported. "He went into that conference room looking nervous, but came out looking relieved, like a weight had been lifted. Beverly, on the other hand, looked like she wanted to murder someone." By the end of the day, Marcus called to give me an official update. "I cannot share all the details of an ongoing investigation," he prefaced, "but I can tell you that we found substantial evidence supporting your allegations." The company's representatives were confronted with this evidence today, and their response was, shall we say, revealing. He explained that the investigation had uncovered not just the unemployment insurance fraud I had reported, but a broader pattern of labor law violations. Datatech had systematically targeted employees, approaching significant tenure milestones, created false performance records, and misclassified workers to avoid paying proper benefits and overtime. "Your case was the key that opened the door," Marcus said. "Without your detailed documentation and the email evidence you provided, we might never have discovered the full extent of the violations." The most shocking revelation came from Thomas. After being presented with evidence of his own complicity in my termination, he had decided to cooperate fully with the investigation. He admitted that Beverly had pressured him to sign off on fabricated performance issues for multiple employees, including me, threatening his own position if he refused. He provided us with access to a secured folder on his personal drive containing templates for creating backdated performance warnings, Marcus explained. Apparently, he had been keeping his own records as a form of insurance, anticipating that someday the system would collapse. The Labor Department's visit had immediate repercussions within the company. That evening, employees received a terse email from the CEO, announcing that Beverly and Gregory had been placed on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation, and that the company was cooperating fully with state authorities regarding certain HR practices. The following day, I received an official letter from the State Labor Department. My unemployment benefits appeal had been expedited and approved in light of the new evidence. I would receive back payments for all the weeks since my termination plus interest. But the investigation was far from over. Over the next 2 weeks, more former employees were contacted by the Labor Department, each with their own story of unjust termination and denied benefits. In total, 28 former Datatech employees were identified as having been wrongfully denied unemployment insurance over the past 3 years. The scale of the fraud was staggering. By systematically contesting legitimate unemployment claims with fabricated misconduct allegations, Datatech had defrauded the state unemployment insurance system of hundreds of thousands of dollars. More importantly, they had denied crucial financial support to dozens of workers during their periods of unemployment. 3 weeks after the initial visit, Marcus and Linda requested another meeting with me. This time they brought along Sophia Williams from the State Attorney General's office. "Your case has expanded beyond labor violations into potential criminal fraud," Sophia explained. "The systematic nature of the deception, the creation of false business records, and the scale of the financial impact elevates this matter significantly." She asked if I would be willing to provide formal testimony if the case proceeded to court, either in a civil action by the state or potential criminal charges against specific executives. Without hesitation, I agreed. This was never just about my benefits, I told her. This was about stopping a system that was hurting real people and their families. If my testimony helps accomplish that, I am all in. The investigation continued to expand, with state auditors now examining Datatech's tax filings and unemployment insurance contributions. They discovered that the company had also been misclassifying certain employees as independent contractors to avoid paying benefits and payroll taxes, adding another layer of violations to the growing case. Throughout this process, I experienced a mixture of emotions. There was vindication, certainly, in seeing my allegations taken seriously and acted upon. But there was also sadness for the company I had once loved working for, and for colleagues still caught in the toxic environment. Most surprising was the overwhelming support I began receiving from current and former Datatech employees. What had started as my solitary stand against injustice had evolved into a collective movement for accountability and reform. People I had never even worked with directly reached out to thank me for having the courage to speak up. Ada kept me updated on the internal changes at Datatech. The board of directors had hired an external consulting firm to conduct a comprehensive review of all HR policies and practices. Several longtime executives who had enabled or ignored Beverly's behavior were also under scrutiny. "The whole culture is shifting," Ada reported. "People are actually talking openly about problems now, instead of just keeping their heads down. It is like everyone was waiting for permission to acknowledge how toxic things had become." 6 weeks after the initial visit, the Labor Department announced its preliminary findings. Datatech was being cited for multiple violations of state labor laws, including systematic unemployment insurance fraud through false reporting, creation and maintenance of fraudulent personnel records, illegal retaliation against employees who filed for rightful benefits, misclassification of employees to avoid benefit obligations, failure to maintain proper employment records. The company faced potential fines exceeding $1 million plus mandatory restitution to all affected former employees. Additionally, their unemployment insurance rates would be substantially increased for at least 3 years due to their fraudulent activity. The day this announcement was made public, I received an unexpected email from Thomas. After months of silence and apparent betrayal, he was finally reaching out. "Melanie, I know an apology is inadequate given what you went through. I failed you as a manager and as a friend. When Beverly targeted you, I convinced myself I was powerless to stop it. The truth is, I was just afraid for my own position. Watching you stand up to the company with such integrity has forced me to confront my own cowardice. I have provided the investigators with everything I know about Beverly's operations. It may not make up for my earlier silence, but I hope it helps bring some justice. If you ever want to talk, I am here." I did not respond immediately, needing time to process my complicated feelings about his role in my termination. But his cooperation with the investigation had undeniably been crucial in exposing the full scope of Datatech's violations. The most stunning moment came when Linda called to tell me that the CEO himself had requested a meeting with the investigators, supposedly to offer full cooperation in exchange for some leniency in the penalties. "He claims he had no knowledge of Beverly's systematic fraud," Linda said, skepticism evident in her voice. "But ignorance of this magnitude in one's own company is itself a form of negligence. The board is apparently considering whether he should remain in his position." As news of the investigation became public industry, publications began covering the story. Without naming me specifically, they described how a former employee's whistleblower complaint had triggered one of the largest labor violations investigations in the state's recent history. Datatech's stock price dropped 15% in 2 days, as investors worried about the financial and reputational damage. 8 weeks after the investigation began, Marcus called with news that left me speechless. "The Attorney General's office has decided to file criminal charges against Beverly and Gregory for fraud, falsification of business records, and conspiracy," he said. "This goes beyond administrative penalties into potential jail time. Your evidence, particularly that email about creating backdated documentation, was instrumental in this decision." I sat down, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had transpired. What had begun as my simple quest for rightful unemployment benefits had exposed a years-long pattern of fraud and led to potential criminal consequences for those responsible. "Did I do the right thing?" I asked Rachel during our next meeting, suddenly uncertain about the far-reaching impact of my actions. Her response was immediate and firm. "Absolutely. You stood up not just for yourself, but for everyone who was wronged by this system. The consequences Beverly and Gregory are facing are the result of their own choices and actions, not yours. You simply brought the truth to light." That perspective helped me process the mixed emotions I was feeling. This had never been about revenge. It was about justice and preventing others from experiencing the same mistreatment. If the investigation had grown larger than I initially anticipated, it was only because the violations themselves were more extensive than anyone had realized. As spring turned to summer 9 months after my termination, the full impact of the investigation continued to unfold. The story of Datatech's systematic labor violations became a cautionary tale in business schools and HR conferences across the state. My name was never publicly connected to the case in official communications, but within the industry, word had spread about my role in initiating the investigation. The day Beverly and Gregory were formally charged marked the climax of this long journey. Seeing their names in the news facing consequences for the system they had created and maintained for years brought a sense of closure I had not expected. Justice, it seemed, was finally being served. The repercussions of the investigation extended far beyond my individual case, creating waves throughout Datatech and the broader tech industry in our region. Within 3 months of the initial Labor Department visit, the full extent of the findings was made public in an official report that sent shockwaves through corporate circles. Datatech was assessed penalties totaling $1.2 million for various labor law violations. This included fines for fraudulent unemployment insurance practices, restitution payments to wrongfully terminated employees, and additional penalties for record falsification. The company's unemployment insurance rates were also increased to the highest category for the next 5 years, a financial consequence that would cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. Beverly and Gregory both faced criminal charges for fraud, falsification of business records, and conspiracy. They each hired high-profile defense attorneys and initially pleaded not guilty, but the evidence against them was substantial. The case attracted significant media attention, with business publications using it as an example of how corporate culture can enable and protect unethical practices. For the wrongfully terminated employees, including myself, the results were life-changing. Not only did we receive the unemployment benefits we had been wrongfully denied, but the Labor Department also mandated that Datatech provide additional compensation for the damage caused by their false accusations of misconduct. For me, this amounted to 6 months of salary plus interest, acknowledging the harm to my professional reputation and the emotional distress I had experienced. Beyond the financial restitution, All affected former employees had their personnel records corrected. The fabricated performance issues and misconduct allegations were removed, replaced with accurate performance histories, and a notation that the terminations had been found improper by state authorities. This record correction was crucial for our future employment prospects. Within Datatech itself, the fallout was dramatic and far-reaching. The board of directors, under pressure from shareholders concerned about both the financial penalties and reputational damage, initiated a comprehensive restructuring of the company's leadership. The CEO, while not criminally charged, was forced to resign for his failure to provide adequate oversight of HR practices. Several other executives who had enabled or ignored Beverly's practices were also removed or reassigned. Most surprisingly, Thomas was appointed as the interim HR director following Beverly's removal. His cooperation with investigators had partially redeemed him in the eyes of the board, and his insider knowledge of the company's problems was seen as valuable for the rebuilding process. One of his first official acts was to reach out to all wrongfully terminated employees with formal apologies on company letterhead. His email to me was particularly personal. "Melanie, I know this comes too late, but I want to officially apologize for my role in what happened to you. Your courage in standing up to the company forced me to confront my own cowardice. We are completely overhauling our HR processes to ensure nothing like this ever happens again. Your case has become a catalyst for genuine change here." While I appreciated the gesture, I was not ready to fully forgive Thomas for his betrayal when I needed his support most. However, I was gratified to hear that positive changes were being implemented, potentially benefiting current and future employees. The impact extended to my professional life as well. As word spread through industry channels about my role in exposing Datatech's practices, I began receiving inquiries from other tech companies. Many were reevaluating their own HR practices in light of the Datatech scandal, and wanted input from someone with first-hand experience of toxic systems. 3 months after the investigation concluded, I received a job offer from Horizon Technologies, a Datatech competitor known for its progressive workplace policies. The CEO reached out personally, expressing admiration for my integrity and courage in challenging unethical practices. The position they offered, senior project manager, with a focus on organizational culture, came with a higher salary than I had earned at Datatech, and explicit support for my continued advocacy work. "We believe companies should compete through innovation and quality, not by exploiting employees," the CEO told me during our interview. "Your experience gives you a valuable perspective on how to build ethical systems that protect both the company and its people." Accepting the position at Horizon marked the beginning of a new chapter in my career, one where my painful experience was transformed into a platform for positive change. I was invited to help develop and implement new HR policies that emphasize transparency, fairness, and employee well-being. My story became a case study in their management training program, illustrating the importance of ethical leadership and the potential costs of allowing toxic practices to take root. My relationships with Ada and Jessica evolved as well. Ada eventually left Datatech to join a startup, citing the need for a fresh start despite the changes being implemented. Jessica stayed, becoming part of the team responsible for rebuilding the company culture. We maintained our friendship, occasionally meeting for coffee to discuss the ongoing transformation at Datatech and the broader industry changes sparked by the investigation. The workers' rights organization I had connected with during my unemployment period invited me to become a regular speaker at their events. Sharing my experience with others facing workplace injustice became a meaningful way to transform my own pain into support for others. Many attendees approached me afterward with their own stories, often asking for advice on documenting issues and navigating the complex systems designed to protect workers. Rachel, the attorney who had guided me through the investigation, saw her practice grow significantly as more employees sought help with workplace issues. The Datatech case had raised awareness about labor rights and emboldened people to challenge unfair treatment. She occasionally invited me to speak to her clients about the importance of documentation and persistence when facing corporate misconduct. 6 months after the conclusion of the investigation, I received an unexpected invitation to speak at a state legislative hearing on proposed reforms to unemployment insurance regulations. Lawmakers were considering strengthening penalties for employers who systematically contest legitimate claims and creating better protections for whistleblowers who expose such practices. Standing at the podium, sharing my story with legislators and policy experts, I realized how far my journey had come from that devastating day of termination. What had begun as a personal fight for justice had evolved into an opportunity to advocate for systemic change that would protect countless other workers. The current system relies heavily on employers acting in good faith, I testified. When companies systematically abuse that trust, as Datatech did, employees with legitimate claims suffer tremendously. Stronger safeguards and more substantial consequences for fraudulent contestation are essential to maintain the integrity of our unemployment insurance system. The media coverage of the hearing further amplified the story, with several business publications running features on corporate ethics and the responsibilities of HR departments. Industry organizations began developing new best practice guidelines, specifically addressing the ethical handling of terminations and unemployment claims. Perhaps the most unexpected outcome came 8 months after the investigation, when I received an email from Amanda Beverly's niece, who had been hired into my former position. She had resigned from Datatech shortly after her aunt's criminal charges were announced and wanted to apologize for her unwitting role in the situation. "I had no idea my aunt had arranged to have you terminated to create a position for me," she wrote. "I feel terrible about what happened to you and wanted you to know I left as soon as I understood what had transpired. No career opportunity is worth being complicit in such unethical behavior." Her message helped heal a lingering wound, reminding me that many people caught in toxic systems are themselves victims of manipulation rather than willing participants in wrongdoing. I replied with appreciation for her integrity and wished her well in her future endeavors. The professional network I developed through this experience continued to grow, connecting me with advocates, attorneys, and policy experts working to improve workplace protections across the state. We began collaborating on resources to help employees recognize and document problematic practices, creating a website that provided guidance on navigating complex labor laws and reporting violations. 1 year after my termination, I received notice that Beverly and Gregory had both accepted plea deals admitting to reduced charges in exchange for cooperation with ongoing investigations into similar practices at other companies. They each received probation community service and were barred from working in human resources or executive positions for 5 years. While some might have hoped for more severe consequences, I found a certain satisfaction in knowing their professional reputations had been permanently damaged by their own actions. Datatech itself emerged from the scandal fundamentally transformed. Under new leadership, including Thomas as the permanent HR director, the company implemented comprehensive reforms to its employment practices. They established an independent ethics committee with employee representatives, created transparent processes for performance reviews and terminations, and developed a confidential reporting system for workplace concerns. Most significantly, they instituted a formal review process for all unemployment claims, ensuring that contests were based on legitimate documented issues rather than automatic denial. This change alone represented a complete reversal of the system Beverly had maintained for years. During a tech industry conference where I was invited to speak about ethical workplace practices, I unexpectedly encountered the new Datatech CEO. Rather than avoiding me, she approached directly and thanked me for forcing the company to confront its toxic culture. "What happened to you was inexcusable," she acknowledged, "but the changes it ultimately triggered have made Datatech a better, more ethical company. Sometimes it takes someone with extraordinary courage to expose problems that everyone else has learned to accept or ignore." Her words reflected the broader impact of the investigation, an awakening to practices that had been normalized, despite their harmful effects on employees. Companies throughout the region began reevaluating their HR policies, particularly around terminations and unemployment claims, aware that the costs of unethical behavior could far exceed any short-term financial savings. As my professional reputation grew, I found myself increasingly sought after as a consultant on workplace ethics and employee advocacy. The painful experience that had once threatened to derail my career had instead redirected it toward meaningful work that aligned with my values. My personal story had become a powerful tool for educating others about their rights and the importance of challenging unjust systems. Looking back on the long journey, from that devastating day of termination to the widespread changes that followed, I realized that the impact extended far beyond anything I could have imagined when I first decided to fight for my unemployment benefits. What began as one person standing up against injustice had catalyzed transformations at individual, corporate, and even regulatory levels. The data tech scandal became a reference point in discussions about corporate ethics and employee rights, a cautionary tale about the consequences of prioritizing short-term financial gains over ethical treatment of workers. And I found a certain peace in knowing that my suffering had ultimately led to protections that would prevent others from experiencing similar injustice. As the dust settled on the data tech investigation and its far-reaching consequences, I found myself entering a new phase of personal and professional growth. My position at Horizon Technologies had evolved from senior project manager to director of ethical workplace practices, a role created specifically to leverage my unique experience and perspective. The first few months after the investigation were challenging emotionally, despite the positive outcomes. I experienced flashbacks to the humiliation of being escorted out of the building, anxiety when checking my email, and a persistent fear that my new employers might suddenly turn against me. A therapist who specialized in workplace trauma helped me recognize these as normal responses to what I had experienced. Your brain is still in protection mode, she explained during one session. It is going to take time to rebuild your sense of security. Be patient with yourself and acknowledge your progress even on difficult days. Gradually, the nightmares about data tech became less frequent. The knot of anxiety that had lived in my stomach for months began to loosen. I started to trust my colleagues at Horizon, allowing myself to form new workplace relationships without the constant fear of betrayal. This healing process was neither quick nor linear, but each week brought small improvements. Building a new life after such a significant disruption required me to reevaluate my priorities and redefine success. Before the termination, I had been entirely focused on climbing the corporate ladder, measuring my worth through promotions and salary increases. Now I found greater fulfillment in helping others navigate workplace challenges and advocating for systemic change. My new home, a modest but comfortable condo, I had finally been able to purchase with the settlement money, and my new salary became a symbol of my resilience. After months of financial uncertainty and the looming threat of having to deplete my savings, having a secure place of my own represented a profound victory. I painted the walls in bright, hopeful colors and filled the space with plants, creating an environment that nurtured my ongoing recovery. The relationships I had formed during this journey became central to my life. Ada, Jessica, and I met monthly for dinner, maintaining the strong bond forged through our shared experience at Data Tech. Rachel and I collaborated on workshops for employees facing workplace disputes, combining her legal expertise with my first-hand perspective. These connections provided not just friendship, but a continued sense of purpose and community. 6 months after starting at Horizon, I received an email from a former data tech colleague I had never been particularly close with. He had been terminated 3 weeks after me, supposedly for performance issues, but had been too intimidated to challenge the decision until learning about my case. "Your courage inspired me to fight back," he wrote. "I just received my back unemployment benefits and an apology from Thomas. For months I blamed myself, thinking I must have done something wrong. Thank you for showing me that sometimes the system is the problem, not the people caught in it." Messages like this arrived regularly, each one affirming that my decision to speak up had created ripples of positive change in lives I had never expected to touch. While the personal cost had been high, the impact extended far beyond my individual situation, validating the difficult choice I had made to pursue justice, rather than simply moving on. Professional opportunities continued to expand as my story became known in wider circles. I was invited to consult with tech companies developing ethical workplace policies, speak at industry conferences about corporate accountability, and contribute to a book about workplace rights in the digital age. My painful experience was transforming into a platform for meaningful advocacy. 1 year after the investigation concluded, I received a surprising invitation to return to Data Tech as a consultant on their ethics reform initiative. My initial reaction was an immediate rejection, unable to imagine walking back into the building where I had experienced such trauma. However, after several conversations with Thomas and the new CEO, I agreed to participate in a limited capacity, conducting remote sessions with their newly formed ethics committee. This decision represented a significant milestone in my healing journey, allowing me to engage with my former workplace on my own terms, from a position of power rather than vulnerability. Contributing to the reformation of Data Tech's culture provided a sense of closure I had not realized I still needed. During one virtual session with the ethics committee, I found myself face to face with several executives who had been present during my termination. While initially uncomfortable, the experience became unexpectedly cathartic when the chief financial officer, who had previously avoided eye contact in hallways, addressed me directly. "I want to apologize for my silence when you were being mistreated," he said. "Many of us knew Beverly's practices were problematic, but we looked the other way because confronting it seemed too difficult. Your courage in standing up to the system has forced all of us to examine our own complicity in allowing such behavior to continue unchecked." His acknowledgement of institutional failure, rather than just individual wrongdoing, reflected a deeper understanding of how toxic workplace cultures are maintained through collective silence and acceptance. This recognition was perhaps the most meaningful outcome of all the changes at Datatech. The criminal cases against Beverly and Gregory eventually concluded with both accepting plea agreements that included probation, community service, and professional disbarment from HR roles. While some might have hoped for more severe consequences, I found I had no desire for retribution. Their public disgrace and professional ruin seemed punishment enough for actions that had stemmed more from systemic problems than pure malice. I learned that Beverly had eventually moved to another state, starting over in a completely different industry. Gregory had taken early retirement, effectively ending his career in corporate management. Their fall from prestigious, high-paying positions to these humbled circumstances served as a powerful reminder of how quickly unethical behavior can unravel carefully built careers. As my second year at Horizon approached, I reflected on the profound transformation in my professional identity. I had entered the tech industry as a programmer, focused on solving technical problems with clear logical solutions. Now I found myself navigating the much messier realm of human systems, corporate culture, and ethical leadership. This unexpected career pivot had aligned my work more closely with my values, creating a sense of purpose I had never experienced in my previous roles. The settlement money and back payments had allowed me to finally pay off my student loans, creating a financial freedom that changed my relationship with work. No longer desperate to maintain employment at any cost, I could make decisions based on ethical considerations rather than economic necessity. This privilege made me even more committed to advocating for those still vulnerable to workplace exploitation. Perhaps the most meaningful development came when I was approached by a state senator to consult on new legislation strengthening protections for employees facing wrongful termination. The bill, informally known among staffers as the Datatech Law, would create stricter penalties for companies that systematically contested legitimate unemployment claims and establish better safeguards against retaliatory terminations. Testifying before the Legislative Committee in support of this bill marked the culmination of my journey from victim to advocate. As I shared my experience and the broader implications for workplace justice, I felt a profound sense of purpose. The traumatic experience that had once left me questioning my worth had become the foundation for work that could protect countless others from similar suffering. The legislation passed with bipartisan support, establishing new protections that would make it more difficult for companies to abuse the unemployment insurance system. While no law could completely prevent workplace injustice, these changes represented meaningful progress toward more ethical employment practices. As I continued to heal and grow both personally and professionally, I reflected often on the lessons this journey had taught me. True strength often emerges not when everything is going well, but when we are faced with profound injustice and must decide whether to accept it or fight back. Systems designed to protect people can be manipulated by those with power and knowledge of their weaknesses, making individual courage and collective action essential counterbalances. Documentation is power. My meticulous records of my performance and the evidence provided by colleagues had been crucial in exposing the truth. Speaking truth to power is rarely easy or immediately rewarded, but the long-term impact can create positive change far beyond our initial goals. Most importantly, I learned that while we cannot always control what happens to us, we can choose how we respond. By refusing to be silenced, by persisting despite obstacles, and by transforming personal pain into advocacy for others, we reclaim our power and create meaning from suffering. Today, as I look back on that devastating Monday morning, when my career at Datatech ended so abruptly, I recognize it as both an ending and a beginning. What seemed like the worst professional experience of my life ultimately redirected me toward more meaningful work and deeper connections with like-minded advocates for workplace justice. The path has not been easy. There were days of doubt, fear, and exhaustion when giving up seemed like the only rational choice. But each small step forward, each small victory built momentum toward a resolution I could never have imagined during those dark early days. For anyone facing similar injustice in the workplace, know this. You are not alone. Your story matters. Your rights are worth defending. And sometimes standing up for yourself creates ripples that grow into waves of positive change for others. Have you ever faced unfair treatment at work and stood up for yourself? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Each experience shared helps others know they are not alone in these struggles. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to support more content about workplace justice and employee rights. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that standing up against unfair treatment is possible and worth the fight. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply refuse to accept injustice.